Yes, welcome to our opening panelists on the Eaton legacy. I'm going to start in the order of the boxes on my screen. So Astrid Bear is the daughter of Paul and Karen Anderson and grew up in the science fiction community. She has always had a great fondness and respect for libraries and librarians, and the bulk of her parents' papers are held by the Eaton collection. So welcome, Astrid. Michael Capobianco has published 2 solo science fiction novels, Burster and Purlieu, as well as short fiction. He is co-author with William Barton of the critically acclaimed hard science fiction novels Iris, Alpha Centauri, and White Light, and the retroactively alternate history novel Fellow Traveler. Capobianco served as president of SIFWA, Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America, as it was then called, from 1996 to 1998, and again from 2007 to 2008. Somewhat inadvertently, Capobianco has evolved from a person who doesn't throw anything away to a collector of SIFWA materials, and then the closest thing that SIFWA has to an archivist. He has been working with the Eaton collection since discovering that they are the caretakers for the photographs of J.K. Klein. So welcome, Michael. Our next panelist is Heath Row. Heath has been involved in publishing zines and related fandom since 1988, when he first encountered Maximum Rock and Roll magazine. His first zines were mundane, primarily punk rock fanzines, No Drama, Blow, and Fifth Man, but his focus on reviews soon led to the review zine Karma Lapel and a number of perzines. His involvement in mundane amateur press associations, such as the American Amateur Press Association and National Amateur Press Association, to which he contributed the Critics Report in the late 2000s, led to APAE, a longtime member of the National Fantasy Fan Federation. At one time, Rowe edited the National Fantasy Fan and served on the club's directorate, and former scribe for the Los Angeles Science Fantasy Society. Rowe currently serves as official collator for APA L and the editor of De Profundis, and contributes to Las FAPA, NAPA, and E-APA, Alarms and Excursions, and the Spectator Amateur Press Society. He's also a member of the United Fanzine organization, which focuses on self-published comics. Having participated in the first annual Underground Press Conference in Chicago in August 1994, Rowe actively donates zine, appé, and fanzine-related materials to several collections. His mundane zines and comics are housed by DePaul University, appé materials at the University of Iowa, and SF materials to a lesser extent here at the Eaton Collection. He's also helped broker the donation of several other large collections to these institutions, and you can learn more about Rowe's recent publishing activity, including his current fanzine, the STF Amateur, at efanzines.com/HR. And Jaymee Goh is a writer, reviewer, editor, and essayist of science fiction and fantasy. She attended the Clarion workshop and completed her PhD from UC Riverside. She wrote the blog Silver Goggles, an exploration of post-colonial theory through steampunk, and is an editor for Tachyon Publications. So welcome, Jaymee, again. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to all other panelists, Michael, Heath, Astrid. And I'll go ahead and get started with the initial questions I sent you, and we can take the conversation wherever you'd like to take it. So let's start with you, Astrid. Please say a little bit about your relationship with the Eaton Collection and tell us a bit more about that, if you would.
Sure thing. I got to go to the Eaton conference once. I'm thinking it was in the mid-90s, and it was really delightful. And I knew Melissa Conway. She was a good friend of my mother's, a delightful woman who was, she was the head of special collections. So, and science fiction was not her jam. She was a Dante scholar, but she really got into science fiction and the community, and I think she was a real asset to the Eaton collection, and spreading its acquisitions out wider. So my mother was living in Southern California when she died, and she had talked with Melissa about donating their materials. My parents were both writers, and there was a lot of materials. But nothing had really been done. So on her death, I said, okay, let's formalize this and do it. And the Eaton collection was great. They even came out. They drove out to Tahunga to collect the stuff. J.J. Jacobson was the curator at the time, and she was so enthusiastic and so wonderful. And so it was just a really wonderful process.
Amazing, thank you. Yes, JJ Jacobson was my predecessor in the role, and again did fabulous work here at the Eaton Collection. So shout out to JJ. Thank you for that, Astrid. Jaymee, why don't you go next? You can talk a bit more about your relationship with the Eaton Collection and your time at UC Riverside.
Sure. I went to UC Riverside mostly because of the Eaton collection. It's like, oh, it's a special science fiction collection. It's the largest science fiction collection. That sounds dope. I don't know if I actually like go into like the archives, deep into the archives, but like I just wanted the opportunity to. So I did get to go into the stacks a few times, you know, just tagging along with the tours. And I also did get to use some of the materials there for my own dissertation, because there were some steampunk books being collected there. And like, I just drew a lot of inspiration, just like kind of browsing the catalog and like checking out materials for my own writing. And as a person who is like also interested in like book making and publishing, like the way the look and feel of old books was very, very fascinating to me. And I believe I have like my papers from my Clarion workshop time there somewhere.
I believe you
Um,
do.
yeah, I think JJ asked me to donate them, and she just accosted me one day. She's like, Jaymee, when are you giving me your papers? I'm like, I write everything on the computer. I don't know if I have any papers. She's like, that counts. I'm like, okay. But I had just like finished my time at the Clarion workshop, and I had like a stack of papers, and I didn't know what to do with them. So I thought, like for posterity, I'd like just leave them in the Eaton to see like who can kind of like create a narrative out of them. So maybe in 100 years, it'll be cool.
I think
So
they're
yeah.
cool now, but
Yeah.
amazing. Thank you so much. Heath, did you want to go next and talk a bit about your relationship with the Eaton Collection?
Sure. I have largely been aware of and in awe of the collection because I'm an active fan editor, amateur fan historian, and can't have everything in my own home. And so it's been important to me to find places that will store fanish ephemera. And so I've known about Eaton for some time, but have recently been more active with the collection in two primary ways. One, in early 2023, a longtime area fan, Marty Cantor, who was also active in fanzine publishing and amateur press associations, died. And he had a sizable fanzine collection. And so another member of the Los Angeles Science Fantasy Society, Nick Smith, and I helped broker with Eaton the donation of those materials, which was a van load. And so my exposure to the collection has largely been organizing boxes, packing boxes, loading the van, and unloading them onto the loading dock. I've yet to be inside, and so someday, Phoenix, I should actually go inside.
Come on down.
Yeah. And the other way I've been involved with Eaton is I'm actively involved in multiple amateur press associations. I can't believe Phoenix read my whole bio.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But it was the longest. But one of them, APA-L, dates back to 1964. It's been publishing continuously weekly since then, and we've digitized all but 6 issues of that and placed those with Eaton. And then I'm also involved in Las Fapa, which is a monthly that dates back to 1976. And we're currently in the process of digitizing and applying optical character recognition to those, so they're fully searchable. And at some point, those will find their way to Eaton as well. But big fan of the collection, and I think it's highly important to make sure that these ephemeral documents that are either thrown away or held tightly by private collectors are publicly available and accessible.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And just sort of related to something Jaymee said as well, the idea of digitizing and born digital files in particular. This is already a question that's sort of come up so far from your comments, and maybe we can think about this through the day of, how do we chronicle, archive the history of and present of science fiction fandom through other means and other ways other than the physical record. Thank you for that. And Michael, over to you. If you could say a few words about your relationship with the Eaton Collection and our materials. Oh, you're on mute, I think. Sorry.
Anyway, yes, I knew that would happen. So my relationship goes back a long way to the fact that at some point in the early 90s was probably a SFWA's author-editor reception in New York, which we called the Mill and Swill just for, giggles. I saw somebody going around taking pictures of everything. And other than that, he didn't really interact that much, so I didn't meet him or anything, but I noticed him and said, yeah, that's great. Somebody's recording this for posterity. And then jump ahead many, many years. And I was looking for a photo. I found a photo of Robert Heinlein accepting his Grandmaster Award. And I went out kind of in my guise as SIFWA archivist to find out who had the rights to this this photo. And that led me to, I guess it was J.J. Jacobson, actually. And I started emailing him, could we use this on our SIFWA Nebula website? And
Oh, sorry, JJ is she, I think, believe her pronouns.
oh, is
but
it she?
yeah. Mhm.
Okay, well, that's news to me, so thanks for that. And so that's pretty much where I ended up. And since then, we've been interacting. Phoenix has become a member of SFWA's History Committee, and we've been working together in various ways in that. So it's a good, long-lasting relationship.
Definitely, and do check out Michael's amazing blogs on SIFWA's website. And actually, maybe you can answer the second question too. You mentioned you sort of become the unofficial archivist of SIFWA, and aside from this sort of serendipitous encounters of folks that, like Klein taking photographs and so on, what sort of drew you to that side of things? Did you see, sort of see a gap in terms of people are not collecting or not sort of keeping careful management of materials, or did you just, you just inspired for another reason? If you could say a bit about that in terms of the sort of archival impulse you had with science fiction.
Well, it's interesting. It developed kind of slowly. I mean, originally, as I say, I just had all this stuff, and I saved, the primary publications of the SFWA were the SIFWA Bulletin and the SIFWA Forum, and I started, collecting them in the 90s. My late wife was also a SIFWA, A.C. Crispin was also a SIFWA member, and so we had duplicates on a lot of that stuff. And eventually I realized that there weren't very many people doing that, collecting that. I think many of members just regarded that as sort of, something to throw away after you'd look through it. So there was a gap, I think, that no one was really thinking about this in terms of, the future. And at some point, since I was president of SIFWA for 3 years, I realized, I'm part of this history. I want to preserve my own stuff. So that's how it developed, and it's been an interesting ride. And it's true that right now there are very few sources of this material, so it's pretty rare.
Definitely, and it's becoming even more ephemeral in some ways, where a lot of the conversations that you'd find in fanzines or amateur press associations are now taking place over Slack or over Reddit, or not so much DMs. It's sort of kind of a fractured digital archive, and these are questions that I feel creators and librarians alike are sort of thinking about. Astrid, did you have any sense of, obviously Paul and Karen Anderson, we have their papers, we have materials from you in the Eaton collection. Did you get a sense of sort of an archival sensibility seeing that collection come together over the years? How did you sorry.
How did I come to realize these were valuable papers?
Yeah, that kind of thing, and sort of the process of watching your folks gather materials up for.
Well, my father had kind of a mixed record with collecting stuff. So he kept manuscripts and so on. He didn't always keep correspondence. And some people out there are just tearing their hair out. Oh, there's no letters, he would receive, and he would often throw away letters that he received. Just receive, well, those belong to those people, and they're not for me to hold on to. But enough of it got preserved that it's of interest. And then, there were materials like maps that my mother drew for his books and so on. And she had a good sense of wanting to preserve things. So I think that's, and then my father's mother was a librarian. She was a research librarian at Carleton College in Minnesota. So, librarianship runs deep in the family. So I think there was kind of always a sense of a certain amount of this needs to be preserved in terms of writers' working papers, and my father had started donating to the University of Southern Mississippi. I think in the late 1960s, early 1970s, there was a tax break thing that kind of prompted him to. You could get things, I think you could self-value them and then send them off to an institution and get a big tax break for it. He had no connection to the University of Southern Mississippi whatsoever. But they have a large children's and genre collection in their libraries. And so that was part of the conversation with JJ is, okay, there's some holdings there. There's a few things that are at, I guess, Texas A&M. Should I put things together, or should I put the bulk of the stuff in some third institution? And JJ said, with the advent of digital and online cataloging and so on, that things aren't as siloed as much as perhaps they would have been in the past, and that it would be okay to split the collection up. So that's kind of how that got finalized.
Amazing, thank you. And it's interesting you mentioned that example. So much I feel of where authors' papers go, or at least partially, can be just sort of these serendipitous facts or encounters. Like Jaymee, you mentioned JJ just accosted you and said, hey, give your papers to the Eaton collection. And yeah, you're totally right, Astrid. That there are several big repositories of SFF, at least in the US, so Texas A&M, Iowa. We'll talk about those a bit later on, but and one of the questions has anticipated this, but there is definitely a sense of collaboration among the institutions, and the fact of letters is interesting because often you have a one-sided record of correspondence between two particular people. The other side might be at a different institution associated with a different author's collection, or it might not exist at all if as you say, folks discard letters. Jaymee, just sort of on that pathway, what was your first encounter with, I know you mentioned you were drawn to the Eaton collection, you'd heard of it, you wanted to research with it. How did you go about approaching the librarian? Was it another serendipitous meeting? What were those conversations like, or was it kind of really a chance thing?
In my case, it was really a chance thing. And I was also just very fascinated about the archives of fanzines, because I kind of came into science fiction fandom via the internet, via blogs and LiveJournal and Dreamwidth. Like there's a lot of like essays and whatnot there. And so I kind of grew up with in this very digital era, and the concept of archiving our works didn't like start occurring to us until later on, like during the great LiveJournal strike through, and just porting ourselves over from my blog to blog, and some of us just losing like whole works entirely. I've seen a lot of people like scramble to save their fan fictions, and we just lose stuff to the ephemeral nature of the internet. Like I had a whole thread of like microfictions on Twitter, and I spent like an afternoon just screenshotting the thread, because there was no other way to like keep them around, and I wanted to deactivate from Twitter. And another part of it is that I kind of grew up in like a class of people, and maybe it's a generational thing, where we move around from place to place a lot. Like ever since I moved out of my parents' house, like I don't think I've stayed in one particular place for more than 5 years at a time. And that would be a very long time. And after that, I would have to like start the whole process of like, what do I bring along with me? What do I leave behind? What do I throw to the trash? And so archiving my own correspondence and my own papers becomes a very difficult thing to think about, because I don't have like a permanent house aside from like my space in Malaysia.
Mhm.
And I'm not about to like ship all sorts of random papers back to my parents' house because I know what they're gonna do, and they're probably gonna like put it somewhere in a box where it'll get yellowed and get eaten by other things because it's very humid
Mhm.
here.
Mhm.
I mean, even setting aside, the whole like Marie Kondo method of like, minimizing our things, like we just, I think a lot of people my generation have a lot of difficulty holding on to stuff. Like I was actually thinking about the word ephemeral before you brought it out. I was like, oh, I'm not the only one thinking about the ephemeral nature of so much of our stuff. Like today's news, I remember reading an article in a book, and one line struck me being like, today's newspaper headline, like today's newspaper, the very important headline becomes tomorrow's, popcorn holder,
Mhm. Mhm.
it holds food for tomorrow,
Mhm.
and it's just difficult when you have a culture of recycling like that, to think about archiving.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And yeah, the point about moving in physical location is so important too. And yeah, I kind of have a similar sort of personal sensibility. I grew up in I was born in Cyprus in the Mediterranean, moved to England, back and forth from the US and UK for quite a lot. And so it's that question of what do you keep, what do you throw away? Although I will say with my official librarian hat on, like we don't recommend the Marie Kondo method for personal archival things. And if you've ever had a chance to visit the Octavia Butler papers at the Huntington, one of the funniest items I found there was there was I mean, it's a huge archive, but there's an envelope in one of the folders that says the meaning of life on the front. And I was like, oh my God. I was a grad student at the time. I was like, this is it. We're going to get the essence of Octavia E. Butler. And I opened this envelope and it was a folded up chip packet, crisp packet. And so she was having a laugh. I was like, oh no, that's not.
That sparks joy though. That sparks joy.
That did spark joy, and it's sparking joy now. So even all these years later. So thank you, Octavia Butler.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. Heath, so just thinking about just kind of bouncing off what Jaymee was saying about the ephemeral nature of things. Obviously, you've done so much work with fanzines, both physical and digital. How is your archival sensibility or literary sensibility, for want of a better term, changed with regards to preserving this history and all its various forms and permutations? I know that's a big question, but
Yeah, I'm not sure I know how it's changed. I think that my involvement in collections over the years, dating back to '94 when I first connected with DePaul and Catherine DeGraff there, um, it was an interesting situation because the conference focused on Great Lakes or Midwest kind of zine publishing. And that was the focus of the conference. I was on a panel with people from Small Press Review, which is no longer around, Fact Sheet 5, which is no longer around, Global Mail. So it's kind of a heady, neat time in Chicago for zines. And what resonated with them and with me was two things. One, because I was able to send them correspondence in addition to zines, they found sizable value in the zine-related correspondence because in pre-internet fanzine days, the paper was the network. And so the relationships and friendships we built, the trips we took to meet each other and see each other, that kind of developing network wasn't really documented necessarily in our zines, but was documented in the correspondence and other documents. And so I was able to place some zine-related correspondence that went beyond, here's $1, send me your zine level correspondence. And because I was able to do that, they actually allowed me to send non-Midwestern or non-Great Lakes adjacent materials. And so my portion of the DePaul collection ranges a little more widely than other materials in the collection. And that was a boon to me because I just wanted to preserve it all. And I didn't necessarily want to fracture it if I didn't have to. But as my involvement in zines has changed, moving to amateur press associations, moving more into science fiction fandom, and related fandoms, there have been different homes that make more sense for those different areas. And so that's why Iowa gets the Amateur Press Association stuff. That's why Eaton gets the Southern Californian and science fiction stuff. But my approach to it hasn't really changed. The online ephemeral nature of the internet, I think, is easier on the fanzine side because a lot of the online fanzines are still PDFs, at least among older fans in organized fandom. And those are relatively easy to save. But I worry about discussion forums, blogs, social media, etc., because there are multiple kind of what I consider gaps in fandom. There's kind of an older, younger generational gap. There's a literary media gap that still exists. There's an online, offline gap. And you can have a really rich experience as a fan on the internet only through social media and still only see whatever random pocket universe you've created for yourself that is highly transitory and still a very small snapshot of everything that's going on. And so the challenge for me these days is how do I actually open my aperture and broaden the scope of my awareness so I'm not only aware of fanzine fandom, organized fandom, fan-run cons, whatever little niche I've found myself in, because we're all aging and we need more young people, more energy, more involvement in fandom, and fandom will exist, just not in the form we know it. But I'm thinking about how do we actually capture, like Discord. There's no record of Discord. You actually can't archive that. And that's different than linear discussion forums or blogs or things like that, which are slightly more easily archived. Websites are slightly more easily archived because of the Wayback Machine and stuff like that. But I worry about kind of that broad nature, inability to capture, and the impermanence of the technologies that we use, even in terms of hardware and storage media. You know, I have friends who have discs of various formats that are unusable, you know, and who knows what's on them. You know, I'm sure it's beautiful, important, valuable stuff that we just can't use because there's no longer a drive or you don't have the cable anymore or the media is beginning to fail.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I can't help but feel, oh, Astrid, go, please.
Yeah, I have a question about that. Do you have, does UCR maintain old things that can read floppy disks and that kind of stuff? Can you convert?
We do, yes, and we have a digitization department that can actually convert things. And also we have, I'm not sure if we have in special collections or if it's in that department. We do have things that machines that can read floppy disks. We have VHS players certainly in the in special collections itself. But even you know, we have a huge DVD collection, and we have, you know, again, we have a television that plays DVDs. But you know, as an elder millennial, even seeing the decline of DVDs is kind of heartbreaking because it's you know, the shift in media is happening so fast, as Heath was saying. But one of the good things about working in an institution and in the special collections is that we have to try and think of the future-proof, how to future-proof these materials, and even if it's just an endless every 5 or 10 years, you know, reversion to a new format or whatever the new format is. But you know, these take time. You know, that there's a huge number of materials, but the main thing is, you know, to make sure they're safe and preserved as much as possible. Everything that is in immediate danger of obsolescence or physical damage, we'll prioritize. But it's a great question, yeah. But I'm happy to say that we can make all of the physical media we have accessible at the moment at UCR. Heath, I was thinking about what you were just saying, and you made me think, and hearing others too, as well as the ephemeral nature of the materials themselves, as we mentioned social media, we mentioned, you know, Slack, Discord, that kind of thing. It strikes me as a concomitant problem with not the dearth of physical meetings, but the way that fandom can gather physically in a space seems to me to be numbers are not as great at conferences, put it this way, as they have been in the past, and this is partly due to you know, we're all based all over the world. They're typically, you know, conferences are typically in North America or the UK. But also, I guess, just the changing nature of fandom and the changing landscape, I guess. People can find and make whole careers online. And this is kind of an open question to you, or anybody can jump in and answer, but how has the physical space of fandom and fandom creation developed or changed, or what is your sense of it today? If that makes sense.
I'd say, I think like Keith was saying, there's all these separate ecosystems. So there are fewer generalists, if you will, people who kind of have an overview of everything. There's people who are super into anime and manga and webcomics and things that some of them are more ephemeral than others. And in conjunction with the shifting population going to more traditional science fiction conventions, there's the skyrocketing explosion of people going to professional media conventions like the Comic-Cons and related things. Those things are gigantic. And those are all people that love this stuff. They just maybe don't know about, this iceberg over here and this iceberg over here. They're kind of on the glacier of mass media. And so more cross-pollination, I think, is called for.
Definitely.
Well, I'd say that for SIFWA, there's a annual discussion about whether the Nebula Award conference will go virtual or not. And for the past few, of course, with the pandemic, it was virtual for a few years, which kind of set up the situation where, it seems like that works pretty well. But there's still a bunch of old people who want to still do it in person, and at least for this year, it will be a hybrid conference. It may not last beyond that in reality, in real life, as they say. So it's interesting. I mean, it's cheaper to do it virtually.
Mm-hmm.
And that's almost an indisputable fact that, it costs money for people to go. It costs people, it's a big production and everything costs money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this recently, Phoenix, because we used to have to go places to do the things that we wanted to do. Like if we wanted a book, we had to go to the library or we had to go to the used bookstore, the Iliad, and look through the shelves to find the one book that we wanted to. And with the advent of the mainstream web and internet, like you can pretty much get anything you might possibly want now in a way that you couldn't before. You can get books used new on Amazon, eBay. There's the Internet Archive, rich trove of books and other materials there, and movies. You used to have to go to the screening at the Revival Theater to see the film you wanted to see, and now you can pretty much stream anything you want, although that changes because the rights change and the access changes. And so it's gotten me think about how we used to have to go to places and you used to have the things. And I think that ownership of items and objects is also changing because like now with ebook, you don't actually own the ebook. And so it can go away or it can change while you own it. You don't own the movie. Um, Even DVDs we don't really own, although you've at least got a physical object that might decay over 20 years. Streaming movies, those catalogs of films are always changing. And so I'm not sure what that kind of tension or balance brings because we have more readily access to everything, but our ownership of it or our accessibility to it might also be transitory in a new way. And that leads to less deeper reading because we're not only limiting our attention to the things that we have locally available to us, and we're also not sharing our experiences necessarily in the same way. And I don't mean in the sense of like a literary canon or books that we all have to read or anything like that, but like there used to be more shared understanding and experiences within the genre because we'd all read the same authors or the same books. And this nichification that we've been talking about is true even in terms of authors. Like there's subgenres, sub-subgenres that I don't read or are aware of, and there's hundreds of authors who are extremely prolific and very popular within that niche. But there's less, other than maybe kind of like mainstream popular genre titles, there's kind of like less understanding or visibility of everything or because of the increase in media fandom and superhero movies and whatnot, it's all more adjacent to kind of tropes and subgenres that are mainstream popular. But I've been thinking a lot about how organized fandom thrived in the past because we had to go somewhere to meet the people that we wanted to talk to. And now that we don't, we can meet people that we don't know as well all over the place and don't really need to go anywhere other than online to interact with them.
Yeah, definitely. And that question of the mainstream is really interesting, and it ties into what Astrid was saying about the Comic-Con as sort of a grown institution over the years. And the generalist, I guess, knowledge of some, what we would call science fiction and fantasy through, superhero fandom, or Hollywood adjacent franchises, but then sort of belies this other whole network of, the deep dives into the various franchises and literary histories and authors. Jaymee, sorry, did you have anything to add to the sort of the physical meeting space of fandom and SF?
Oh, it's just at the back of my mind. I'm just like screaming, like, what for?
Oh,
What for?
I
Minimum wage isn't going up. It's cost so much to travel. We have to like choose where we're going to see as many people as possible in one single event, one single weekend. And then we have to
that
take into
part.
getting sick later. So we're very limited in like when and how and where we can meet up with people. And that's, I think, part of why so many online communities proliferate, because it is easier to spend time with people chatting nonstop over, AIM, if you guys remember AIM, and have Discord. That we couldn't before. Like I first discovered fandom when I was in Malaysia, and I met a lot of Americans that way. I met a lot of UK people. I even met like very randomly other Malaysians, but not within my hometown. Which it would cost a lot of money to have gone out to the events to like meet them. So yeah, like that's kind of like part of why I think that's part of why we're drawn to the big media events, because I feel like it is very costly, but like you get to maximize your entire convention experience that way, which I think is a bit of a shame, because I do really like the smaller fan conventions as well. I really enjoy going to LostCon when I lived in Riverside. I like going to the small, like California, like up in Oakland and San Francisco, those smaller events. And when I lived in Hamilton and in Canada, I would go to a few of the East Coast steampunk conventions. And I like those, like being able to see the same people at multiple different conventions. And also finding that a different mix of people to meet up with there. It's a very, very different dynamic from online meeting. I think we see that too with the pandemic, where everything was on Zoom, everything's great and everything's hybrid, but people got Zoom fatigue and people got really tired of being in front of the screen all day, because there is a certain lack of affect that we kind of have to make up for when interacting with each other on the screen versus when we're interacting in person. So it's kind of like what's in the back of my head when I think about it. I think it would be nice, but it's also very expensive.
Definitely. Thank you for raising that. It's such an important point. And last year, when I was beginning to conceive of this symposium, putting it together, obviously, like I mentioned earlier, the Eaton Conference has a very illustrious history. It used to be several-day affair at the Mission Inn downtown Riverside, which is a very fancy hotel. Folks would travel in, or other places, other physical venues, and the good and the bad things, like in 2025, we can have, folks from all over the world zoom in, and even though it's late, and people can view and watch this, in times to come on YouTube and whatnot. But you're totally right. There is that sense of, there is that kind of texture of physical community making, I guess, for want of a better term, that you can only get really when you have people in a space. And just sort of, if I could ask a follow-up, Heath mentioned the sort of sub-genres, niche genreification of fandom, and not just fandom, but the creative works that are produced. Would you feel comfortable speaking a bit on that as your given your current work in publishing? Do you see that in terms of the types of stories that are published today, or in terms of your own work? How do you sort of navigate that? And again, you don't have to, you can share as much or as little as you like with that process.
There are certainly a lot of works that I see that clearly kind of come out of being a fan. In fact, one of the books I edited that came out last year, Bitter Medicine, definitely like kind of came out of a certain like subgenre of fandom. Mia was very inspired by the xianxia genre, and that's actually how we position it in the market, is that it is a xianxia inspired novel. And then there are like these, because it's also a romance novel, there are these long sex scenes, which I read them and I'm like, you came out of AO3 to give us this novel. Because there's a certain kind of like tone and like, you know, fandom indulgence that does end up inflecting our work, which I didn't tell her to cut because, you know, it's there for a reason. But I did like have her heavily edited to something else. So I do see that. I do see it. Like, I think a lot of us got our starts in fandom. And I think a lot of even like the older generation of science fiction writers got their starts in fandom as well. And I think that is like, I think that's part of like why science fiction fandom to professionalization like is a very fascinating process for me. Because not all fans want to become science fiction pros, right? We just want to stay writing fanzines and writing fanfic, and was absolutely not interested in monetizing at all. And then we've got all these people who are very much like they're using fandom as like kind of like a training ground for their own writing to eventually like branch off into writing their own works and producing their own like series in the future. So I think like, and I love that there is room for all of that in fandom and with the larger culture industry of science fiction. I've seen a lot of like in steampunk too, like, you know, a lot of people get into steampunk via the DIY, and then they go on to these really cool like craft careers, which, you know, may or may not end up being steampunk, but like steampunk was just the starting point.
Amazing.
So
when you definitely, and when you say DIY, do you mean the physical like crafting hobby, woodworking and soldering and that aspect of things?
Yeah,
That's amazing.
Who knew? We all just want to have like pretty things in our lives.
Exactly.
Some of us will pay others to make those pretty things.
This is true.
Projects.
Absolutely. I've dropped the link to Bitter Medicine. And for those of you tuning in, if you don't follow Mia on Instagram, she is hilarious. I live for her Instagram posts. And she's a fabulous writer as well. So do check that out. Yeah, it's fascinating, that idea of that pathway from fandom to you know, professional writership. Astrid, Michael, Heath, have you sort of seen or experienced that in your own careers? Are there any memorable examples that come to mind for you, where somebody you've published, or maybe something you've written in your transition from fan to author that sort of stood out to you?
I'm not really much of an author, but I have to. But my father certainly did that pathway. I mean, he was reading Astounding magazine in the 1930s and started writing. And somebody sent me an image of a letter to the letter column. I think it was Astounding. That maybe is from my father, because it was from a Paul Anderson, Paul, in a small town in Minnesota, which is the town adjacent to the town he lived in, and maybe the farm PO box was in that other town. I don't know. And it was kind of critiquing, you know, the way the letter columns were at that time, they're kind of critiquing the stories that were in it, and really like this one, and this one was a kind of a miss, and so on. So yeah, that path is a well-worn one, from being a reader and doing fan activities. My father was involved with the Minneapolis Fantasy Society when he was in college, and made wonderful friendships there, and then started selling and just kind of kept on going and maintained those science fiction and fantasy fan connections throughout his life.
I have a perfect example of my late wife, Ann Crispin, who made that transition from fan to professional writer back in 1983 when she wrote, she was a Star Trek fan who sat down and wrote a Star Trek novel based on Spock having a son with Zarabeth in one of the Star Trek episodes about the son, Zar, who she called Zar. And she just sent it off. There was some, within the fandom community, there was some sense of how to get a book published, although this was very early in the Star Trek publishing program. So it was, it was kind of like, this is one of the first that actually broke that barrier. And, and then she had a very, very lucrative, career following on that and doing other, doing novelizations and basically writing the backstory for Han Solo, the backstory for Jack Sparrow. And it was a lot of fun for her. And, just me watching from the sidelines, it was a lot of fun to discuss these things too.
Wow, amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
And I've always kept, I guess, my vocation and avocation separate. I mean, it's been largely the same practice and trade. I've worked as a newspaper journalist, reporter, copy editor. I've been a magazine writer and editor. And so I write a lot. But my fanish writing has always just kind of been for kicks. and the thought of trying to make a living off of it is interesting to me, because even now that I'm like late career and starting to think about what I might do next, I do think about, do I edit anthologies? Do I help agent? Do I, whatever. But I have a cautionary memory from when I was in high school. So an ex-girlfriend's older sister got a job editing for TSR before it was bought by Wizards and when they were still actively publishing game tie-in novels for Dungeons and Dragons and the like. And Amazing Stories had relaunched and was this glossy magazine that TSR was publishing. And I was just in awe of Lisa being able to work there, because she was an avid and active reader who is now working in something that I thought was just going to be heaven. And this is a sample of one, but she hated it because it was work. It was actually no longer fun. And she, wasn't able to kind of parlay the fanish fun of reading and enjoyment to the professional trade in a way that was meaningful or valuable to her. And I've just kind of always kept that in mind, because even now I'm active in 6 or 7 different amateur press associations. I do a monthly fanzine that's 50 to 75 pages long. It only goes to 70 people, so it's not that big a deal, but the deadline pressures remain as real. And sometimes that leads to it being a hassle. And when fan activity becomes a hassle, we're doing it wrong in some way. And so I'm just always mindful of that tension of, is this fun or work? And if I'm not making a living at it, what do I let go of so it can kind of return to the fun that brought me to it in the first place?
Can I bring up, like, that just made me think about an academic equivalent that I experienced when I was at UCR. And I was part of the science fiction reading group that was, I think, coming out of the English department. And so the idea was that we would like read a piece of fiction together, and we would gather once a week to discuss this usually newer piece of fiction. And it was fun at first, but then it started being like an extra seminar, because everyone was just so gung-ho about trying to say the most profound, like, trying to really intellectualize this exercise, because that's what we're all used to doing in a discussion about a piece of text. And we had some like visiting folks from the MFA creative writing department, and they would sit in on our sessions. They would just be like, on because they're coming in from a completely different perspective. And in the end, like Nala Hopkinson had to start her own science fiction reading group out of the creative writing department that would approach it from a different angle, which was mostly like craft. And because I crossed the streams a lot, I sat in on those as well. And those were a lot more fun because we took the time to like play around, write some microfiction, write some like fiction or poetry or, you know, whatever our genres were, to the theme of whatever we were reading that week. But it was very interesting to see, and how, you know, a lot of my peers would just like turn their fanishness into like this very academic exercise. And like, but do you like what you're doing? Why are we always so stressed? Like, are we not taking some joy in our research? Which sounds like I'm slagging on like my peers here, but like that is sometimes how I felt. And I know that we all loved our research to some level. Like you kind of have to stick with it for a very long period of time, right? But man, I kind of wish we had more optimistic ways of speaking about our research in grad school.
Definitely, you definitely triggered some memories from my own grad school time. And it was funny because I did grad school 2013 to 2019, and science fiction was kind of becoming a little bit sexy in academic circles, but it's still not very sexy. So, but people would always come to me like surreptitiously, you know, like, so what are some good science fiction novels to read? Almost as if it was like a dirty little secret, you know. But the fact was that the field, you know, if you're interested in any aspect of society, you know, technology, communication, identity, geography, you know, science fiction is there in all of it. And it's fascinating that you mentioned the sort of different reading groups, because I feel like you get that sense with the various conventions and conferences that take place, like ICFA's coming up in Orlando, which is more academically oriented, but it does have some creative tracks. And then something like WorldCon, which is just, you know, everything and anything, in a glorious way, but in kind of overwhelming way as well. Where something like ReaderCon, which I've never been to, but I would love to go one day, is from what I hear much more craft centered.
Yeah, and I felt like BlizzCon too had this like slightly elevated discourse. Because it's feminist science fiction conventions. Like, you bring in a lot of feminist theory, and it ended up being a lot of intersectional theory, and it's very great. It's a great place to kind of like practice that vocabulary. Great. I feel like it was a great place for like budding scholars as well. But yeah, it was a little hard trying to get my peers out to the local conventions. It was like, I had a friend who was trying to convince another friend. They were trying to go to a local anime con. And so this one friend was trying to convince her classmate, like, we should, you know, put together a panel and like, you know, pitch it to this con and we'll get comped. You know, we're so used to paying to get into conferences. And she, and this classmate was so paralyzed because she was like, I have to come up with an abstract. I have to come up with like a whole topic. I have to write this paper. And my friend was just like, no, you don't. We're just gonna sit together and just chat about stuff. Yeah.
It's the joy aspect. Yeah, you mentioned.
And it was just so hard for her to kind of like get out of that academic professional aspect. Yeah.
Definitely. And I think that ties in. I think we've all maybe seen this a little bit with what you're saying, not just about the, you know, the cost of traveling to conventions and taking part in fandom activities, but also the administrative work, the administrative time, you know, the volunteering. You know, Michael, I'm sure you've seen this in SIFWA. Astrid, Heath, I'm sure you've seen this in your own work too, in careers. You know, these things are often run by fans who come from a place of joy, who are doing it for the passion. God knows there's never usually much money involved in any of this. And it's sort of finding the community members with the energy and the willingness to do these kinds of things in 2025 and beyond, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, the convention runners love running conventions, and there's kind of this permanent floating committee that especially with Worldcon, people will be like division heads who are not even in the same state or even the same country as the hosting Worldcon, but they've done it for many years, and the advent of Zoom and digital spaces makes it a lot easier for that. And I hope they're recruiting younger folks into this this cadre, because they're providing a valuable service, and they are not getting paid at all. And that's the big divide between the volunteer conventions that are, from the traditional standpoint, which Worldcon still is, and then the professional conventions, which are the big media conventions, and everybody's paid, including the attendees. Like the excuse me, the media personalities. They're getting money.
Oh yeah,
they're not for love.
Definitely. We have about 7 minutes left. I just want to make sure there's time to answer any attendee questions. So if you have any for any of our panelists, please do drop them in the chat. I saw there is a question from Space Cowboy Books. Shout out to Jean-Paul Garnier, who is an amazing editor, anthologist, author extraordinaire, bookseller based out in Joshua Tree. And he asked, how often are fan materials accessed by researchers, and does the Eaton work with the collection at University of Iowa to cross-reference to fanzines collections? My short answer to that is yes, very collaborative. We're always, emailing back and forth on the list. So, would you like this fanzine collection? Do you have any gaps in your collection? Do you need these issues? And I guess, has there been collaborations in terms of like different fan communities in your work as panelists? Can you call up folks from the other side of the country or other side of the world and say, hey, do you want to contribute? Or how have those kinds of cross-institutional, cross-geographic collaborations been a part of your own careers?
Again, not a career person so much, but I do want to mention the volunteer work done by fanac.org. And what they're digitizing fanzines, and they're available freely online. I love that Eaton Collection is digitizing some of the fanzine materials so it can be available to people who are not able to travel to Riverside, which is great. Little sidebar, as long as we're kind of wrapping up, I want to send praise to Andrew Lippert, who's the archivist there, and such a nice person, so helpful. Everything is in good hands with him, and if your materials are there, they're not gone to you. If a finding aid is created, Andrew has now, like 2 or 3 times, I said, okay, Andrew, can you look in box 17, folder 3, and tell me if such and such is there? And if it's there, he'll send me a copy of it. So it's well cared for and available.
In fanzines, zines sometimes only published by one person, written by one person, and sometimes they're more a Gen zine that includes multiple authors and contributors. And I've just started to kind of broaden my approach to publishing, so it's not just me saying things in my fanzines, but other people. And so selfishly, I'm going to openly invite absolutely everybody on this call that if you have written something or want to write something and you can't find a place for it, fiction, nonfiction, essay, joke, song lyrics, whatever, I will certainly entertain your contribution and help you find a fanzine to publish something that you might not know where to go with it yourself.
Amazing, thank you. And yes, definitely shout out to Andrew Lippert. He will be speaking at 10:30, so to talk more about exactly his work in archiving this material. Yeah, just on that note, where can we find you if you want to be found? What works should we check out? Is there anything you're particularly passionate about? We've had fanac.org, that link is in the chat. Where can attendees sort of take part in these fandom communities?
In addition to fanac.org, if you're interested in kind of the current state of online fanzine publishing, efanzines.com is a good place to go. If you're interested in learning more about amateur press associations, most of them are only available to the participants, but the EAPA, which is a PDF-only amateur press association, once a year in October publishes an open issue that anyone can access. So if you'd like to see what a amateur press association looks like, you can check that out. or reach out to me and I'll send you a sample of APA-L so you can kind of see what that weekly looks like.
If you want to, for participants who are not so plugged into the science fiction community, if you want to find out more about events, people, personalities, upcoming books, a place to start is locus.com online. Online magazine really covers the field very well. A little more gossipy is File 770. Dives into all kinds of interesting things. So there might be a convention in it, within an easy drive of where you live, and check it out.
Yes,
both great posts.
Shout out to Locus. You should subscribe to that magazine because they work very hard on that print magazine. It is very, very pretty.
Yeah, the physical magazine is totally worth the money. It's been going since the 1960s.
Started as a fanzine. It's awesome.
Yeah. From fanzine to the great journal.
Absolutely. And we actually are very lucky to have Liza Tromby speak with us on the panel at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time today. So thank you. Those are even more great shout outs.
Well, I would, throw out sfwa.org, especially if you're interested in becoming a professional writer or dabbling or just learning about SFWA and how it operates.
Oops. Okay, perfect. Yes, I just realized I've been copying all my links to hosts and panelists only, so I will redo those. Apologies. While I do so, Jaymee, have you got any works that are upcoming or things from Tachyon that you'd like to shout out?
Oh, I've got all the books that I've got to shout out that are coming out 2015, but the first one, the first two that's coming out will be in April and May. One is a novella called One Level Down by Mary G. Thompson. And the other is The Adventures of Mary Darling by Pat Murphy. None other than Pat.
Nice.
And then I have another novel coming out, If Wishes Were Retail by Austin Habishaw. I'm very excited about that one too. And then a fantasy novella by Martin Cahill in September. So those are the 4 books. I will link to them on my website, jaymeegoh.com. I have a page dedicated to my Tachyon wish list and my Tachyon acquisitions on there. And I can otherwise be found on Blue Sky and Threads and Instagram and all the usual suspects, but not Twitter. I deactivated from Twitter. I'm probably going to deactivate from some other places too. Who knows? Maybe I'll finally revive my Dreamwiz account. And I'm also occasionally on AO3. And a lot on Discord as well, because K-Tempest Bradford started a Discord server for BIPOC fans, which originated as a place to discuss safer space issues at WisCon, but has since become more generalist. Yeah, because I'm also part of the Culprin Society, and we have some other programming that we're intending to do this year.
Amazing.
Oh yes, and I have a short story coming out later this year in an anthology called We Will Rise Again, which was edited by Annalee Nowitz, Malka Older, and Karen Lord, coming out from
Nice.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. This has been a really great conversation. Thank you for sharing your time, your expertise. Chat, give it up for our panelists, Astrid Bear, Heath Row, Michael Capobianco, and Jaymee Goh. You should see the links now. Apologies, I was sending it to the wrong people. They're sent to everyone now in the chat. I will just mute and go off camera and let our panelists go for the next 15 minutes or 13 minutes. And then if you can, do join us at 10:30, where you'll be hearing from myself and my colleagues here at the library about our work with the Eaton Collection. So thank you again to our panelists, and we'll see you very soon. Take care.